In 1871, the factory chimneys of Milltown coughed thick black smoke into the sky, hiding a darker secret. Beneath the whirring of machines, the mill owner forced his workers to drink blood, not metaphorical, not ceremonial, but human. Those who refused vanished without a trace, leaving only silence behind. The town of Milltown, nestled along the banks of the Hudson River, was small but prosperous in 1871, thanks to the massive cotton mill at its center. Smoke from its towering chimneys coated the streets in a gray haze, mingling with the sweet iron-like tang of the river. Immigrant families worked from dawn to dusk, their hands blistered and lungs blackened by soot. The mill's owner, Horace Whitmore, was a tall man with a pallid complexion and piercing gray eyes. His reputation for efficiency was unmatched, but whispers followed him wherever he went. Rumors of cruelty, of men disappearing quietly, of nights that none dared speak of. New workers arriving from the city immediately noticed the peculiar routines. Before each shift, Whitmore would summon them into his office, a cavernous room lined with dark wood, its floorboards slick with wax and something far less innocent. He would produce small iron cups, filled with a dark liquid, and insist they drink. Those who questioned it received a tight smile, polite yet utterly terrifying, before returning to the factory floor. The children of workers, sent home at dusk, whispered of shadows moving along the mill's walls and of screams muffled by the roar of machinery. A young apprentice, Thomas Keene, recorded in his notebook the strange occurrence. Men who refused the drink grew pale, listless, and then, by morning, were gone. No bodies were ever found, only their empty beds and the lingering smell of iron where they had slept. Thomas's curiosity was matched only by fear, but he began to observe closely, noting the cadence of the mill, the strange hush that fell each night, and the blood-like liquid that Whitmore demanded. By evening, the town had grown restless. People avoided the mill after dark. Windows were shuttered early and doors bolted with care. Whitmore, however, moved freely, a specter in a tailored coat watching his workers like a hawk. The rumor mill spun faster than the water wheel outside. Whispered tales of forced drinking, strange chanting, and shadowy figures in the storage cellars. "Tell me in the comments," the narrator asks, voice low and tense. "Would you have stayed in Milltown? Or run before the night swallowed you?" One evening, Thomas discovered a hidden staircase beneath the mill floor, leading down into darkness. Beneath the mill, the stone cellars stretched farther than the eye could follow, corridors twisting like the veins of some great sleeping beast. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood, dust, and damp earth, clinging to the nostrils and throat. Thomas Keene descended the stairs one evening, lantern in hand, the wooden steps groaning under his weight. Every footfall echoed back in uneven patterns, as if the cellar itself was listening. Here the machinery's roar faded to a muffled hum. Shadows gathered in the corners, shifting when he turned, dissolving when he looked closer. At first the cellar seemed abandoned, racks of barrels, coils of rope, and stacks of crates. But then Thomas noticed iron hooks embedded in the walls, small stains dried dark red, almost invisible in the dim light. Each step carried him deeper into a sense of unease he could not shake. He stumbled upon a low door, its iron hinges coated with rust and something far fresher, slick, red, and metallic. Pushing it open revealed a chamber at the heart of the cellar. Its stone floor was etched with spirals and lines, dried blood darkening the grooves. A single table stood in the center, a basin on top filled with a thick, glistening liquid. Thomas gagged at the smell, copper and decay, unmistakably human. From somewhere above came the distant clang of machinery and the hum of the river outside, but in this chamber, silence was complete, almost sacred. Then he heard a whisper, low and commanding, emanating not from a person, but from the stone walls themselves. "Drink or vanish." Thomas froze. The air vibrated with it, a pressure against his chest, a summons from some authority beyond reason. He dared not move further, retreating back up the stairs into the faint safety of the mill above. Yet even in the hallways he felt the liquid's presence in the shadows, as though it had seeped upward, waiting. That night Thomas recorded every detail in his notebook. He wrote of hooks, stains, and the echoing voice, noting that several workers had disappeared the previous week, their absences unexplained. But he also noticed something else. faint footprints leading from the chamber to the living quarters of the mill owner. Outside, the wind carried whispers from the town. Children shivered behind shuttered windows. Somewhere in Milltown, Horace Whitmore smiled, knowing the cellar's secret had yet to be discovered fully. And Thomas, unaware, would soon witness the ritual, the ceremony Whitmore demanded, and the choice every worker had to make. Before dawn, the mill took on a sinister stillness. The usual roar of looms and belts was replaced by a thick silence, broken only by the drip of condensation from the stone ceilings. Workers shuffled into the main hall, faces pale, eyes hollow, hands shaking. Thomas Keene watched from the shadows, lantern trembling in his grip. He could see the fear etched into every line of their faces, the knowledge that refusal carried a price none dared name. Horace Whitmore appeared at the center of the hall, his tall frame casting long shadows in the candlelight. He held a set of small iron cups, filled with the dark metallic liquid that had haunted the town's whispers. His gray eyes swept over the workers, and his lips curved into a smile that was polite but lethal, promising punishment without effort. "You know the procedure," he said softly, voice carrying the chill of command. "Drink and the day begins as normal. Refuse and disappear." A worker, small and trembling, raised his head. I cannot drink this," he stammered. His eyes darted to the nearest exit, but there were none. The doors were barred from the inside. Whitmore's smile widened. "Then you will not leave." Thomas, from his vantage point, noticed the other men's eyes, a mixture of despair, resignation, and something darker. One by one the workers stepped forward, gripping the iron cups with white-knuckled hands. The liquid's coppery scent rose to Thomas's nose, making him gag. The first man drank. His face contorted, then went pale. He lowered the cup, eyes vacant for a moment, then straightened, a hollow obedience in his posture. One worker refused. Whitmore's eyes glinted like steel. A silence fell over the hall, thick and suffocating. The remaining men glanced at each other, then turned back to Whitmore. The man who refused was dragged away by two burly attendants, his screams muffled by the thick walls of the cellar below. Thomas's stomach churned as he realized the disappearance was immediate, brutal, and final. As the ritual continued, Thomas noticed the pattern, a rhythm to the drinking, a subtle orchestration in Whitmore's movement. The cups were not simply vessels. They were instruments, connecting the mill, the workers, and the cellar beneath. The liquid was the key, the binding agent, the price of continued survival. By the time the last man drank, dawn had begun to seep through the mill windows, pale and gray. Whitmore surveyed his domain with satisfaction, his secret maintained, his power absolute. Thomas's hand trembled over his notebook. He knew the cellar held more than blood. It held the answers to the vanished workers, the horrors behind Whitmore's success, and the darkness he was about to uncover. After witnessing the ritual, Thomas Keene could no longer think of the mill as a workplace. It was a theater of horrors, meticulously orchestrated by Horace Whitmore. The next day he returned, feigning compliance, while his mind raced with questions. How long had Whitmore been practicing this? How many had vanished? And why did the town remain silent? Thomas knew the answer lay in the mill's ledgers. Whitmore was meticulous in all things, and numbers were a language he trusted more than men. Late that evening, when the factory lights dimmed and the night watch shifted to the river, Thomas crept into the mill owner's office. Dust coated the shelves, the air thick with the smell of ink and wax. On the mahogany desk lay a massive ledger, its pages yellowed and edges frayed. He opened it carefully, eyes scanning the neat rows of names, dates, and wages. At first the entries were ordinary, payments, overtime, deductions for tools. But as he flipped deeper, the margins became crowded with annotations, written in Whitmore's small, precise script. There were symbols beside certain names, subtle marks that initially seemed like clerical notes. But the pattern became apparent. Every worker who had disappeared was flagged. The notation accompanied by a single cryptic word, consumed. Thomas's stomach churned as he turned to the earlier pages. The ledger dated back decades, even before Whitmore had fully acquired the mill. Hundreds of names, hundreds of workers, vanished without a trace. And the annotations were consistent, methodical. Whitmore had been performing this ritual for years, decades perhaps. He noticed entries marked differently, with phrases like resistant, repeat, and one chilling entry, family next, for continuity. Beneath it, a careful notation of a shipment of iron cups, copper basins, and a cryptic reference to cellar purification. The realization struck Thomas like a hammer. The blood drinking was not mere superstition. It was a structured, recurring ritual, meticulously recorded, designed to maintain Whitmore's power and, possibly, his wealth. A soft creak of the office floor startled him. Thomas froze, lantern shaking in his hand. Whitmore's shadow loomed in the doorway, tall and composed, eyes reflecting the lamplight. "Curiosity," he said, voice smooth as oil, "can be dangerous, especially when applied to matters beyond understanding." Thomas slammed the ledger shut, hiding it under his coat, heart hammering. He backed into the shadows, mind racing. The notes in the ledger were more than bookkeeping. They were evidence, proof of a town's secret, a systematic horror hidden beneath soot and machinery. Outside, the wind carried a faint metallic tang, and from somewhere below, a drip echoed. Not water, but the lingering trace of blood. "Imagine this was your workplace," the narrator whispers. "Would you have reported it? Or joined to survive?" The following week, Thomas moved cautiously among the workers, listening to conversations that had grown increasingly hushed. Whispers traveled like shadows along the walls of the mill, fleeting, fearful, yet insistently present. Every worker knew something, yet no one dared speak openly. Eyes darted nervously when Whitmore passed, gray eyes sharp and unnervingly observant, as though he could read secrets hidden in the air itself. The men spoke in low tones, often in corners where the machinery's roar masked their words. They talked of the cellar, of the ritual before dawn, and of those who had refused the drink and vanished. Thomas recorded everything in secret, his hand trembling. Each story was worse than the last. The accounts of pale men carried off in chains, of screams muffled by stone, of blood used to mark the floor and seal some unholy covenant. One worker, a wiry man named Jacob Haynes, confided to Thomas that he had seen a figure, crouched over a copper basin, whispering to the liquid before handing it out each morning. "He talks to it," Jacob whispered, voice trembling. "And it talks back. You hear it, don't you?" He glanced around nervously. "It knows if you hear it, Thomas." "It knows." Even the youngest apprentices were affected. Their hands shook when preparing machinery, and at night some could not sleep. They spoke of shadows slipping between the beams, of whispers echoing in empty hallways. Some began drawing strange symbols on scraps of paper, spirals and loops, curving like veins or roots. Thomas noted the resemblance to the markings he had seen in the cellar beneath the mill. It was in these whispered exchanges that Thomas realized the terrifying truth. Whitmore's ritual was not merely a method of control. It had transformed the workers themselves. The blood was more than sustenance. It was binding them, linking their minds, their fear, their obedience to something ancient, something hidden beneath the mill. The cellar was not just a room. It was the heart of a machine that controlled more than flesh. That night, Thomas overheard a conversation that chilled him to the bone. Two men spoke of the annual selection, the time when Whitmore would personally taste the drink with a chosen worker, marking them for the cellar. After that, one whispered, "You either survive or disappear." Thomas shivered. The ritual, the ledger, the whispers, it was all part of a larger pattern, a system no one had questioned because no one dared. Outside, the mill's chimneys coughed a black cloud over the town. Somewhere in the shadows, the drip of blood echoed from the cellar. "Would you have survived here?" the narrator asks. "Or would you have joined just to keep breathing?" Thomas Keene could no longer ignore the pull of the cellar. The whispers, the blood-stained rituals, the vanished men. It was all part of a hidden system, meticulously maintained by Horace Whitmore. One night, while the mill slept under the heavy fog rolling in from the Hudson, Thomas crept back, lantern in hand, determined to uncover the full truth. Descending the narrow staircase, the air grew colder, thick with iron and decay. Each step sent a shiver up his spine as though the stone itself resented intrusion. At the base of the stairs, the familiar chamber awaited. The triple-etched spirals in the floor glimmered faintly in the lantern light, the copper scent of blood curling around him like smoke. But tonight something was different. A faint glimmer, almost imperceptible, caught Thomas's eye near the far wall. Hidden beneath loose stones was a small, leather-bound notebook, edges frayed and ink faded. The handwriting was Whitmore's, Meticulous, deliberate, unnervingly neat. Opening the notebook, Thomas discovered meticulous instructions for the ritual, the exact amounts of blood to be consumed, the sequence of workers to be selected, and a schedule tied to phases of the moon. There were sketches, diagrams of the cellar, the positioning of cups, basins, and the markings on the floor. Each page carried a note in the margin. Efficiency requires obedience. Fear ensures compliance. One page made Thomas pause. It contained a chilling annotation. The blood is not only nourishment, it is preservation. Each drink binds the worker to the mill and to me. Disobedience severs the connection. His stomach turned. Whitmore had discovered a method to dominate, not merely through fear, but through something unnatural. A bond tied to the life force itself. As he read, a faint sound rose behind him, a whisper, soft yet insistent, carrying the metallic tang of the blood-filled basins. Thomas spun, lantern shaking, but saw only the shadows cast by the rough stone walls. Yet the whisper continued, threaded with words he couldn't fully understand, a cadence that seemed to twist the air around him. Then he noticed the footprints, small, delicate, and damp, leading from the far corner of the chamber to the basins. They were not made by the adult workers. The pattern was inconsistent, almost childlike. Thomas realized with horror that someone, or something, had been moving through the cellar unseen. Suddenly, a creak above marked the approach of Whitmore himself. The apprentice quickly concealed the notebook, his heart hammering. The ritual, the ledger, the whispers, all converged on this night. Outside, the mill's machinery rumbled faintly, as if sensing the intrusion. And beneath the stone floor, something ancient, patient, and hungry waited to reveal itself. Above the cellar, the mill seemed calm, though the hum of machinery carried a tension that made Thomas's skin crawl. He knew Horace Whitmore's presence above was inevitable. The man's footsteps echoed through the hallways, deliberate, measured, a predator moving among prey. Thomas gripped the hidden notebook, each page a testament to horrors he could barely comprehend. Whitmore's office, Thomas discovered, hid more than ledgers. A concealed door behind a large tapestry led to a narrow spiral staircase, descending farther than even the cellar. Thomas had never seen anyone use it, and curiosity wrestled with fear. Lantern in hand, he slipped inside, heart hammering with each step. The air grew thick, damp, and coppery, carrying the unmistakable metallic tang of blood. At the bottom, a heavy iron door barred his way. Its surface was etched with symbols, strange spirals, jagged lines, and markings that matched those in the cellar. The smell was stronger here, almost suffocating, and the whispers grew louder, layered with unintelligible syllables that pressed against Thomas's mind. He pressed his ear to the door. Behind it, the sound of movement, footsteps, low chanting, the clink of metal against metal, and the unmistakable murmur of something breathing that did not belong to any human being. Summoning courage, Thomas pushed the door open. Inside was a chamber unlike any he had seen. The walls were lined with copper basins, each containing a thick, dark liquid. The floor bore carvings identical to those in the cellar, but far more intricate, forming a pattern that seemed almost alive, pulsing faintly beneath the lantern's light. At the center of the room, Horace Whitmore stood over a large basin, speaking softly to the liquid, his hands moving in precise, ritualistic motions. The room seemed alive, vibrating with energy, a combination of fear, devotion, and something else, something ancient and sentient. Thomas realized with horror that this chamber was the heart of Whitmore's power. The blood was not merely sustenance, it was a binding agent, a conduit that connected the mill, the workers, and the hidden presence that slumbered beneath the stones. Suddenly Whitmore turned, gray eyes piercing the dim light. "I wondered when you would arrive," he said, voice calm but deadly. "Curiosity is commendable, but dangerous. You see now what keeps this mill alive, Thomas. The choice is simple: drink and be part of it, or refuse and join the others in silence." The apprentice froze, the whispers rising around him, echoing off the copper walls, mingling with his own heartbeat. Outside, the mill's chimneys puffed smoke into the night, hiding the horrors below, while Thomas faced the impossible truth. To survive, he may have to betray everything human within him. By dawn, the mill was alive with a ritualized rhythm, the machinery clanking in perfect harmony with the heartbeat of the cellar below. Workers moved mechanically, each step deliberate, their faces pale but obedient. Thomas watched from the shadows, lantern flickering, realizing the full extent of Whitmore's control. This was no ordinary factory. It was a machine of dominance, fueled by fear, blood, and something far older than any man in Milltown. The apprentices and laborers lined up before the basins, iron cups clutched in trembling hands. Whitmore, tall and commanding, moved between them, his eyes assessing each one, noting hesitation, measuring resistance. Those who faltered were nudged forward, a polite yet firm touch that carried the weight of death. The first cup was lifted, and the copper scent of blood rose, mingling with the acrid tang of coal smoke and the sweat of 100 workers. One by one they drank, faces contorting, lips trembling, hearts hammering in synchrony. Thomas noticed the subtle changes, shoulders stiffening, eyes dulling, expressions blank yet fixed. The liquid did more than sustain, it rewired them, aligning their minds with Whitmore's will, binding obedience in ways the body could feel but the mind could not name. A man at the end of the line froze, hand shaking. Whitmore's smile was polite but chilling, a predator's patience. "Drink," he said softly, voice echoing in the cavernous hall. "Or vanish." The man refused. Instantly 2 attendants seized him, dragging him toward the cellar door, the echoes of his protests swallowed by the roar of the mill. Thomas swallowed hard, stomach churning, as he realized the fate awaiting the disobedient, a swift, brutal disappearance into the hidden darkness below. The remaining workers watched, a collective shiver running through them, understanding without words what had just transpired. Thomas's hand gripped his notebook, heart hammering. He knew that documenting the ritual was dangerous. Even discovery could mean death. Yet the truth was undeniable. Whitmore's secret relied on fear, blood, and compliance. The ritual was cyclical, predictable, and horrifyingly effective. Outside, the town remained oblivious. Smoke poured from the chimneys, masking the screams, the whispers, the silent obedience of the mill. The machinery's thrum was the heartbeat of an industrial monstrosity, sustained not only by coal and water, but by a power far darker, hidden beneath stone and blood. Thomas realized with dawning horror that the workers' compliance was not choice. It was enforced by something unseen, ancient, and eternal. The mill itself had become a conduit, and every man who drank was bound deeper into Whitmore's control. "Would you have survived here?" the narrator asks, voice low and haunting. "Or would you too have lifted the cup, sealing your own fate?" The following week, whispers of disappearance spread like smoke through the mill, though few dared speak them aloud. One by one, men who resisted Whitmore's ritual vanished without explanation. Beds remained empty, clothes folded neatly, and yet the workers themselves were gone, leaving only the lingering metallic scent of blood and fear. Thomas Keene recorded each disappearance meticulously, noting patterns in the ledger, desperate to understand the process before it claimed him as well. It began with Samuel, a young laborer known for his quiet strength. One morning he refused the cup, shaking, voice trembling. "I cannot drink this." "It is wrong." Whitmore's gray eyes held him for a long moment, unreadable. Then he nodded to the attendants. Samuel was seized, dragged to the cellar, his screams muffled by the stone walls. Minutes passed. Silence returned. No one emerged. The next day, another man, John Barrett, faltered, hesitated, and met the same fate. The pattern became horrifyingly clear. Refusal meant immediate removal, permanent, inescapable. The remaining workers' compliance grew rigid, their fear thick and tangible, binding them as securely as any chain. Thomas felt it in his own bones. The cellar below was a place where defiance went to die, swallowed by darkness that no one returned from. He remembered the hidden chamber and the iron basins, the spirals carved into the floors, and the whispered chants echoing through the stone corridors. Whitmore had created a system in which human will was irrelevant. Every man who drank was tethered to the mill, to the ritual, and to something far older that pulsed beneath the floorboards. Resistance was not tolerated, and those who defied it became part of the unrecorded ledger, names removed from life, leaving only a vacuum in the town's memory. Thomas's fear escalated with each disappearance. He began noticing subtle changes in the remaining workers. A dullness to their eyes, a stiffness in their posture, a quiet resignation that seemed almost unnatural. The blood ritual was more than control. It was transformation, erasing the self to bind the body and soul to Whitmore's authority. That evening, as the mill's machinery slowed to its nightly rhythm, Thomas peered down the cellar stairs and glimpsed a shadow moving toward the basins. Not a man, not fully human. Something fluid, almost alive, hovering near the edge of candlelight. The whispers rose, a chorus of echoes from the vanished, mingling with the metallic tang that filled the air. Thomas understood the horror fully. In Milltown, obedience was survival. Defiance was death. And beneath the mill, the vanished lived on, not as men, but as a part of something dark, eternal, and waiting. "Tell me in the comments," the narrator whispers, "would you have resisted? Or drank to survive?" Thomas Keene returned to the cellar under the cover of night, compelled by a mix of terror and determination. The ritual, the disappearances, the whispers, all demanded answers. Lantern in hand, he descended the familiar steps, the scent of iron and damp stone curling around him like a living thing. Each drip of liquid echoed, a reminder of the lives it had consumed. At the heart of the cellar, the iron basins awaited, lined neatly along the walls, filled with the thick metallic liquid. Thomas knelt beside one, leaning close. The surface shimmered unnaturally, reflecting the candlelight in distorted, almost sentient ripples. He noticed faint markings etched around each basin, symbols matching those in Whitmore's secret chamber. Slowly he traced the carvings with a finger, feeling an almost imperceptible warmth, a pulse beneath the stone. Then he saw it. Beneath the basins, faint engravings linked each cup to the cellar floor itself. The liquid, he realized with growing horror, was more than a drink. It was a conduit, a channel through which Whitmore drew obedience, vitality, and perhaps the very life force of his workers. The inscriptions suggested a network, a hidden system designed to bind each man physically and spiritually to the mill. Thomas's mind raced. The disappearances, the ritual, the ledger's notations, everything was connected. The iron basins were not merely vessels. They were instruments of preservation and transformation. Drinking was not submission. It was assimilation. The worker became a part of the mill, tethered to its machinery, its walls, and ultimately to Whitmore's will. Those who refused were severed, removed from life entirely, their essence perhaps drawn into the basins themselves. A faint whisper curled around Thomas's ear, soft and alien, as if the liquid itself had spoken. He shivered, pulling back. The sound was not human, yet it carried meaning. A call, a warning, a claim. Somewhere deep beneath the floor, a presence stirred, resonating with the rhythm of the mill, the pulse of the blood, and the obedience of the workers. Suddenly, the cellar door creaked. Whitmore appeared, eyes glinting like steel. "Curiosity is dangerous," he said, voice calm but lethal. "The basins maintain order, life, and continuity. Without them, chaos would consume this town. Every sip binds the willing. Every refusal disappears." Thomas understood the full horror. The iron basins were the linchpin of Whitmore's empire, a tool that enslaved, sustained, and consumed. Beyond punishment, beyond fear, they held dominion over life itself. Outside, the mill's chimneys exhaled black smoke into the pre-dawn sky. Inside, the basins pulsed faintly, as if alive, waiting for the next hand to lift a cup, for the next soul to be claimed. "Imagine this was your town," the narrator whispers. "Would you have walked away, or lifted the cup?" By the summer of 1871, the town of Milltown had become a place of whispers and shadows. From the streets above, nothing seemed amiss. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, children played near the riverbanks, and merchants called out from stalls. Yet beneath the hum of everyday life, the mill throbbed with a secret pulse, a rhythm rooted in blood, obedience, and terror. Thomas Keene, forever changed, left the mill at dawn one morning, lantern extinguished, notebook hidden. He had witnessed the rituals, the disappearances, and the secret chambers. He had glimpsed the iron basins and understood their power. He knew he could never speak, never write openly, without risking his life. Milltown's secret was too tightly bound to its people, its economy, and the silent complicity of those who feared the wrath of Horace Whitmore. The workers remained, pale and obedient, carrying on as if nothing had happened, yet each step echoed with the weight of what they had endured. Their compliance was a ritual in itself, a continuous act of survival. The vanished were never mentioned, their absence explained away as relocation, illness, or accident. And yet, at night, some swore they heard whispers, faint, metallic, and unnervingly human. threading through the stone floors and echoing along the cellar walls. Whitmore, ever meticulous, maintained his empire with unwavering precision. The ledgers recorded names, disappearances, and the cycles of compliance. But the true power lay beneath the floorboards, in the iron basins, and in the silent obedience of those who drank. Over time, even the memory of the missing workers faded from the town's consciousness, leaving behind only the hum of the mill and the subtle, persistent tang of iron in the air. Decades later, historians would note the efficiency of the mill town, mills, the productivity of its labor force, and the enigmatic disappearance of several men during Whitmore's tenure. Few, however, connected the dots, and even fewer dared speculate on the rituals whispered in half-forgotten journals and anecdotal accounts. The truth remained buried, literal and metaphorical, beneath layers of stone, wood, and secrecy. Thomas Keene's notebook survived, hidden in the attic of an old house once belonging to his family. Its pages were fragile, its ink faded, but the horror recorded within remained. The rituals, the iron basins, the vanished workers, all a testament to the dark ingenuity of Horace Whitmore and the cost of obedience. And still, some nights, travelers near the old mill claim to smell the metallic tang of blood in the air. Some swear the machinery hums faintly, even though the mill has long been abandoned. Beneath the ground, the basins endure, and the legacy of Milltown persists, a town built on fear, ritual, and a secret too horrifying to forget. Would you have survived here? The narrator whispers, fading like smoke. Or would you have lifted the cup, sealing your own fate?